Today we're going to be looking at the disciples' claims, world religion's claims, and history's claims of who this man, Jesus, is. And we'll find our beginning to this message in Matthew chapter 16. We'll start in verse 13. Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, and I'll go through 17. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" So those of you who don't understand that terminology, he's asking them, who do people say that I am? Jesus. This is Jesus speaking. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Remember our message on Elijah, the forerunner. Ultimately, that was fulfilled as we studied John the Baptist as well. That was fulfilled in John the Baptist. Some believe that he's the forerunner, that the Messiah would come after him. Some believe that he is Elijah come back himself. Some believe that he's John the Baptist because at this time, John the Baptist had already been beheaded. And they were looking at this story saying, maybe John the Baptist has come back. Obviously, these individuals hadn't seen the totality of Jesus' ministry because John the Baptist and Jesus simultaneously live at the same time before John is killed. Matter of fact, John the Baptist baptizes Jesus. And so these are people obviously ill-informed, but they're people on the outskirts saying that have just been introduced to Jesus that are saying, this guy possibly is John the Baptist. You know how rumors start? And rumors can circulate pretty quickly at Sunrise Adult and Teen Challenge. As many times rumors get back to me, as they've started maybe as one truth and they've gotten back to me as something else. We all know how rumors work. And so we see here that these people had believed rumors of who he was, and people were making claims as to who Jesus might be. He said to them, but who? So we're in verse 15. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? So not just who are these people and what do they say about me? We're going to look at that as we look at world religion's claims today. We're going to look at what our current world religions have to say about this man. But what about you? Because at the end of the day, it's not about world religion's opinions of Jesus. It's about yours. You're the one that's going to have to answer for your opinion and your decision on who he is. Simon Peter replied, "You're the Christ." This means the anointed one, the Messiah, the Mashiach that was foretold in the prophets, the one that would liberate God's people, the Son of the living God. So Peter has put Jesus as the Son of the living God. Obviously, he said under Jesus' teachings enough. And some of the things we looked at last week as we looked at Christ's claims, he's believing what Jesus is saying. He doesn't completely understand what that means, as you'll find out later when Peter responds to Jesus, when Jesus is going to the cross and tries to resist him. But we see that Peter acknowledges that he's the Son of God. What do humans birth? Humans, right? We begat what we are. I have a son and he looks a lot like me. I have a daughter and she looks a lot like my wife. We begat what we are. So C.S. Lewis has a great apologetic argument about this concept of the Son of God, that ultimately the Son of God is not something other than deity. God doesn't begat. His Son is not something other than deity, because he is God. He begats. His Son is divine. And so Peter seems to be making a divine claim here of who Jesus is. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Messiah, not just the Messiah, but the Son of the living God. Verse 17, and Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you." Jesus is affirming what he's just said. Flesh has not revealed this to you. That all of the opinions of this world haven't revealed this to you. That the Holy Spirit, that the teachings of Jesus and Peter has come to the understanding of who Jesus is by the teachings he sat under, by what he's seen Jesus do, and what he believes Jesus to be. You need to understand that later as we look at the disciples' claims and these men who gave their lives for this truth. And I tell you, You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he secretly charged his disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. Jesus does this from time to time, and this may confuse some of us as he speaks of who he is. He affirms who he is to Peter, but then he says to Peter, hey, let's keep this on the down low. That's my paraphrase. If you weren't familiar, let's keep this on the down low. Why? There's a ton of reasons why. The crowds at this time had swelled to over 10,000 many times. Jesus feeds thousands and thousands of people on a couple of occasions, and they're just counting men on those occasions. So really, a conservative numbering of those people there on the day when he's feeding them is around 10,000, because it's just numbering men. You add wives and children, and you're well over 10,000 people. The crowds have swelled. The Gospels don't just speak of Jesus in this way. The history speaks of Jesus in this way. We'll see that Josephus later speaks of Jesus, and Josephus speaks of why ultimately John the Baptist is killed, because the crowds had swelled even under John the Baptist's ministry to the point where the people that were wielding power in that region wanted to shut this group up. They were getting large. And what happens when large groups gather in the Galilee and in Jerusalem? Usually what happens after that is revolt. You see, Rome is reigning over the region. They have their puppet kings, Herod the Great at one point, and then Herod's sons are broken up and given different regions. And at this point, Herod's sons are given positions. Well, these sons are trying to hold power, and if Rome finds out that there's upheaval in the land, they'll quickly unseat them. They don't care. They don't have any loyalty to these puppet kings. They'll just put someone else in charge who can rule with an iron fist. And so there's tension over these groups of thousands and thousands of people that are meeting. So why is Jesus saying, don't tell anybody? It's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why when he's teaching in the Galilee and crowds swell, that he gets in a boat and he goes over to the other side. And then many times, half of those people go around the lake to the other side to meet him, because they're just clinging to Jesus. We see it again with the woman with the issue of blood. The Bible says that the crowds thronged around Jesus. That means there's a great press, that it was shoulder to shoulder tight, and people are bound up in that place, and they can hardly move because the crowds are so big. It's where people get trampled. Matter of fact, recently in Israel, there was a Jewish celebration, and the number of people got trampled just in the last year, because a great celebration was happening. There were so many people, and there was this part where they were going through that was constricted. And when they would go through that part, the crowds would congest, and eventually a number of people died and were injured in Jerusalem. So it's not abnormal. So there's a lot of reasons. Jesus hasn't completely even revealed to his disciples yet the complete totality of what he's going to do. There's a point where he sets his face toward Jerusalem and he starts talking about his going away. And his disciples are frustrated by that. They don't understand what he's talking about. Because even in the end, the disciples don't get it until his death, his burial, and his resurrection. So this is Jesus we're talking about. So what are world religion's claims about this man? Well, let me say this. 98% of world religion looks at Jesus as a positive religious figure. I want you to think about that for a minute. 98% of world religion. That means of all of those in this world looking up at the heavens and the stars and saying, why am I here? Why do I exist? What is this planet and why am I on it? The existential question that everyone asks at some point in their lives. Of all of those people that are seeking truth adamantly, that are seeking it in Hinduism or Buddhism, or the Hare Krishna religion, or the Muslim faith, or whatever these individuals are that are looking toward the heavens and saying, why am I here? They all have one person they look to as a positive religious figure. Now, I've painted two pictures for you. He's either a madman or he is God, who he said he was. There is no middle ground. Yet all of these people that we're talking about, and we're going to go one by one and look at world religion and see what they say about him, they've gotten to the point where they don't want to say that he's a madman, Because they know there's something in Jesus. Because they look at Jesus and they say, there's something about this guy. We don't know what, and so they come up with something. And then there are those of us who understand who he is and who he said he was. 98%. That means that the hub of world religion, at the hub, the middle of the wheel that all the spokes lead to, is a man named Yeshua, the Messiah. Now let's look at each one of those cults, faiths, whatever you want to call them. The Jehovah's Witness are going to call him a son of God and God's son only. They don't believe that he is deity, that he is God himself, but that he is God's son. What you'll find in the Jehovah's Witness cult is that, like when they go door to door and things of that nature, that they automatically try to relate by painting themselves as Christians to some degree. And they'll say, oh yeah, we believe in Jesus too. But the Jesus they believe in is not the Jesus that we believe in. He is not just God's son. He said, if you've seen the Father, you've seen me. He said, before Abraham was, I am. We talked about that and unpacked that last week. Next, we have Hinduism. Hinduism is what you call a polytheistic religion. That means they believe in a host of gods. It's much like Greek mythology, but even more so, as they believe in thousands and thousands of God in Hinduism. Well, what do they say about Jesus? They don't say he's a madman. They say he's one of many gods. He's one of many gods in their pantheon of gods. Next, we have Buddhism. Buddhism claims that he's an enlightened teacher. Well, my question is if he's an enlightened teacher, would he claim to be God? If he's an enlightened teacher, would he claim to have the power to forgive sins? If he's an enlightened teacher, would he claim omnipresence? Before Abraham was, I am. That he exists at the beginning, still, and he exists at the end, now and always. That he is outside of time. Well, the Buddhism believes that he's just an enlightened teacher. Why can't they just come out and say, this guy done lost it? Because they look at him and they say, something in that Jesus. Buddhism says there's something in that Jesus. Hinduism says there's something about that Jesus. Jehovah's Witnesses say there's something about Jesus. Mormonism gets a little wacky with Mormonism. They believe he's a man who became a god. Not God who became a man, but a man who became a god. So if you're following the Mormon faith, if you will, use that term loosely, then you believe that Jesus is the brother of Satan. Jesus was a man born like you and I, by a father and a mother, and he was a man that somehow became a god from his good works on earth. So if you die, and this is the reward of the Mormon faith, if you die and having become enlightened and become a god, that ultimately you'll be given your own planet to rule. So right now, according to Mormonism, there are hundreds, I assume. I don't know the number on what they would assume here, but hundreds of planets that are being ruled by men who have become gods. We are on the planet of Jesus. There might be a planet someday of Jeff Gossett. What does that planet look like? There might be a planet someday. Can you imagine all of us? A planet of Jesse. I'm going to live on Jesse's planet. No, not even that. I want to live in reality, right? Can you imagine each and every one of us? Dear God, help us if I'm ruling over my own planet. I mean, my anger gets the best of me. I got problems, man. I'm a man, like you and everyone else. I mean, can you imagine if we ruled our own planet? Well, this is the claim of the Mormon faith, that Jesus is a man who became a god, and now he's been given his own planet. You know how he repopulates his planet? Through polygamy. That's why in the early onsets of Mormonism, they believe in polygamy. That means they have multiple wives. That means that basically you're having eternal sex forever in heaven and you're repopulating your planet with your spirit babies. That's it. They don't open with that when they come to your door. Listen, do you want spirit babies? And multiple wives? I can't deal with one wife. Hallelujah. That's not what they open with, but what I want you to see here is that the Mormons look at Jesus and say, he's somebody. He's somebody, right? So we're looking at this and understanding that all of these spokes lead to Jesus. Next, we have Judaism, the faith that we are grafted into. Judaism believes that Jesus was a Pharisee. That means that he was a good teacher, basically. There were different sects of teachers in that time, different groups. The Sadducees were one. The Pharisees were another. The Zealots were more of a militant group during the time of Jesus. The Herodians are another group. And so all these different factions and sects of groups that amassed during the time of the Bible. The Jewish people to this day will look back at Jesus, Yeshua, and say, he's somebody. It's not who the Christians say he is. He's somebody. He's a good teacher. Well, what good teacher would say the things that Jesus did? What good teacher would lead his disciples to martyrdom on a lie? Well, I would say no good teacher. There is no middle ground. Judaism even looks back at Jesus and says, he's somebody. Next, we have the Baha'i world faith. We could go on and on. I'm just going to give you guys a few, but this is just one of many. They believe that he is a manifestation of God. That he is God, as in like the angel of the Lord, a manifestation of God on earth. And that's it. Not that he is God, as Jesus claimed to be. Next, we have Wicca. Wicca believes he was a spiritual teacher. Say, Jesus, he's somebody. He's a spiritual teacher. Let's call him that. Next, we have the Nation of Islam. This is not Islam itself. This is a faction of Islam in America. It's an Americanized Islam. Nation of Islam believes that he's a sinless prophet of Allah. The sinless prophet. What sinless prophet lies and misleads? But they look at him and say, he's somebody. Matter of fact, when they say his name, Yeshua or Jesus, they say, blessed be the name. Immediately when they say it. And him, Jesus, blessed be the name. They honor his name in such a way because they say he's somebody. And not just somebody, but a sinless prophet. Why is it that all people and all religions are pointing back at this man? Transcendental meditation believes that he's a man who discovered divine essence. We don't have time to unpack that today. But you see that they point back at Jesus and they say, man, this is a man who discovered something, a divine essence. This is my favorite one. Or nope, not quite yet. Christian Science believes that he's a man who displayed the Christ idea, which equals perfection. Christian Science is not Christian at all, if you're not familiar with Christian Science. But they believe that Jesus is a man who displayed the Christ idea. Next, my favorite. The Hare Krishnas believe that he's an enlightened vegetarian. Hallelujah. They say, he's somebody. Isn't it interesting how all of these world religions start to paint Jesus in their own image? Right? For Islam, he's for the Muslim beliefs, he's a sinless prophet of Allah. You know, for these guys that meet you at the airport back in the day with flowers and dance around with tambourines and timbrels and wear all white and shave their heads, that they are like at the end of the day, I don't know who he is. Let me paint him in my image. He's an enlightened vegetarian like we are. Isn't it interesting? How they try to paint him in their image. Where are they getting that image? Where are we getting all this information? You know where we're getting this information? I'm going to show you in a minute in history's claims. I've already showed you what Jesus said in the Gospels. So how is it that they're reading what Jesus says and they're just saying, I don't believe that. Let me just paint him how I want to paint him. You can't do that. Now you can claim that this book has been corrupted and you can argue that. I don't think with much of an argument in the way it stacks up against history. But why is it that you're getting your information from this? If it's been contorted and manipulated, then why are you now manipulating it into your own image? Let's just read it for what it is and hear what it has to say. There is no earlier document speaking of the life, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. This is where they get their information. But they're looking at it saying, I don't think he is who he said he was. Let me paint him in my image. Next we have New Age. Means they think he's a guru. One of many teachers that lead others in practicing yoga, I assume, and stretches and the downward dog. No. Surprise, surprise, they're painting him in their own image. He's one of the gurus. Why? Because they have gurus. And Jesus was just one of many gurus. That's their accolade of him. That's what I want you to see in all this. Yes, these people are contorting who Jesus is, but they are praising him to some degree because they can't just say, no, this guy's crazy. It's like Jim Jones. This guy led people down the wrong path, claimed to be something he wasn't, and then he died as a criminal. Well, which is it? And why is it that they think they can change who he is, and where did they get that information? The Muslims, which is different from the Nation of Islam, an Americanized version of the Muslim belief system, Muslims believe that he's a prophet. And in the Quran, prophets do not lie. Muslims believe that he's a prophet. They're all pointing back at this man. Who do we say that he is? That he is God. He is who he said he was. Where do we get our information? From his word. We're going to look at history's claims in a minute, but we look at what he says and we either believe it or we don't believe it. I believe it. And I believe that every spoke points back at him for a reason. I believe that all of world religion looking at the heavens and saying, why are we here, all have one common denominator. And it's not Muhammad. It's Jesus. He is the center of the hub. He is the reason we are here. He is God become man. He is in the very nature of God. He is Jesus. God becomes man to save man. So we've looked at world religion's claims. Now let's look at the disciples' claims. So the disciples claim this, that Jesus is the Messiah. So we're going to look at each one, and we're going to look at exactly how they died. We all know that they claim the same thing. So let's just paint that real quick. This is what they claim Jesus was. We're reading their letters about who he was. We're reading Matthew, we're reading Mark, we're reading Luke, we're reading John, we're reading 1st and 2nd Peter. Peter says this, those things that we have handled with our hands. That these are not just men that started following a faith and were deceived. These are men that saw Jesus with their own eyes. Thomas at the end says, I won't believe until I touch the nail marks on your hands. I won't believe until I see the nail marks on your feet. These are men that saw him alive, saw him crucified, and saw him after death. All first-person accounts of who Jesus was. So I will say this, and I've had conversations with somebody recently about this, that yes, people will believe a lie, and they'll even die for a lie. We saw this in Tiananmen, I'm probably butchering that, but at Tiananmen Square, where the Buddhist, sat in front of the tank, I believe it was, and lit himself on fire. He was willing to die for something. Does that mean what he was believing in was true? No, not at all. Jim Jones' followers, some of them were willing to die. This Heaven's Gate cult that followed Marshall Applewhite, they were willing to die, all of them, for a lie. The difference is this with the disciples. We're not talking about people that are just believing a religious construct and have come to believe that because they've been deceived. We're talking about people who saw him. People who touched him. People who walked with him for 3 years. Broke bread with him. Ate fish. Laughed along the Galilee. Fished and walked and prayed and learned together. We're not talking about people who just believed an idea. We're talking about people who saw a person, believed a person, and followed him. So now as we look at these men, we can ask ourselves, if you put yourself in their shoes, what would you do in this scenario? Matthew was killed by stabbing as ordered by King Hyrcanus. Now, every one of these guys I'm going to show you, most of them were given the opportunity to not believe that Jesus died and resurrected. So all of these men are going to die for this truth. Like I said, not just some religious contract, the truth that they lived with Jesus for 3 years, they saw him crucified, and they saw him after crucifixion and after death. So then they go out like madmen and they evangelize the world. How would you react if you had lived with Jesus for 3 years? He was your brother. You loved him, you believed him, you hung on his every word, and then you saw him bleed out on a cross, and you wept and you mourned with his mother Mary. And for 3 days, he was in the ground, and you wept and you wondered what life would look like. But all of a sudden, Jesus walks into the room with the doors shut, and he says, Thomas, feel my hands. Thomas, feel my feet. These are the men. These are the men that died for the truth, not a lie. You see, Matthew was killed by stabbing. James, the son of Alphaeus. James was the son of Alphaeus. He was crucified. Crucified on a cross like Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus. Now this one really gets me, okay? James, the brother of Jesus. Now, there ain't nobody that knows Jesus more than James as far as the disciples are concerned. His brother. James, after Christ's death, becomes the father of the church in Jerusalem. He's who Paul, the apostle, comes to understand what he needs to do when he goes into the temple to make sacrifice. He first consults James, the father of the church in Jerusalem. This is James, the brother of Jesus. Why is James all of a sudden the father of the church in Jerusalem and willing to die for this truth? Now, we all got brothers, and I could just tell you the dirt on all mine. We're not talking about just normal people. We're talking about the brother of Jesus. You think he would be willing to die for this lie that he saw with his own eyes? I think at some point, James would have said, listen, man, before you stone me to death, let me just let you guys know I don't want to die today. It's all a lie. Every one of these guys had that opportunity. Listen, hold back. Wait a minute. Just don't. Let me confess this. I don't want to die one stone after another and be kicked to death on the ground. Listen, my brother was a punk. He used to hold me down when I was a kid, give me wet willies, tap on my chest till I cried, dunk me in the water, thought I was drowning. I ain't dying for that dude. Right? Once they start putting your feet to the fire, you gonna die for something that's not true, that you saw with your own eyes? If there was some elaborate scheme concocted among all of the disciples, you think one of these dudes would have broke. Nope, not one of them. James was thrown down from a great height. This is how you stone people. This is what they were trying to do to Jesus on a couple of occasions when he claimed deity. They will throw you down from a high place, you kind of topple down, and you're just sitting there all mangled and still alive, and then they come with boulders, and they stink and kill you. One boulder after another. That's how James died. At the hands of Ananias, the high priest in Jerusalem, the very city in which he was the father of the church in Jerusalem. James died in around 66 AD. Much of this history we get from Christian orthodoxy and Christian history, the early church fathers and the Fox's Book of Martyrs, as it walks through history and how these men died. Some of them come from Josephus, the Jewish historian. We find that James comes from the book of Josephus, comes from more than one place, that James was killed by the high priest. Next we have John. John is John the Revelator. Now, John is dipped in burning oil. Man, And then he's exiled to Patmos around 95 Anno Domini AD. So he's dipped in burning oil. Listen, my toe hits the oil. It's all a sham. All of it. I got together with Peter, with Matthew. We concocted this thing. I'm not going to be deep fried. I paid my way through college by working at Dairy Queen, and I worked on the fryer to some degree. And I remember when that grease would pop back and land on your skin and burn you good. I used to have spots on my arms at times working on the deep fryer. Can you imagine? No, don't talk about spots. I'm talking about you, all of you. Toes, ankles. I mean, by the time you got to your knees, come on, man. Would you not squeal? It's all a sham. No, they weren't willing to. Why? Because they saw him die. They lived with him, and they saw him again after death. And they said, I'll die for this. I'll be dipped in oil. I'll be crucified. I'll be thrown down from a great height and stoned to death. But I saw him. Tell me I didn't. Jesus died, resurrected, and lived again. You see, these are the claims. You tell me what these men claimed. Are they liars? Well, they paid for the truth with their life. Now we have Mark. Mark is burned during Roman Emperor Trajan's reign. I'm going to move a little quicker now through some of these. But Mark is burned during Roman Emperor Trajan's reign, burned to death. Man, you ever do that as a kid? Like, would you rather be burned to death or freeze to death? Like, neither. Why are you so sadistic? I'll take option C. He's burned to death. Peter, this is probably the most famous of the disciples. Peter is crucified, but wanting not to be crucified like Jesus, to dishonor Jesus in any way, he said, yes, but crucify me upside down, because I don't deserve to die the way Jesus died. Do you hear the heart of these men? Do you hear the bold statement as they gave their lives for this truth? You see, that's Peter. Next, we have Andrew. Andrew is crucified on an X-shaped cross. I mean, people argue of what kind of cross Jesus was crucified on. I don't think it's worth arguing. The reality is they crucified people on all kinds of things in the first century. They hung them on walls. They hung them in trees when they ran out of crosses. And they did many times, as they crucified 3,000 plus people on one occasion. They would just hang them in trees because they ran out of crosses. X-shaped crosses were, used. And in this case, there was an X-shaped cross used for Andrew. Next we have Philip. Philip is stoned and crucified in Hierapolis. We do a teaching in Hierapolis. I've been there. But Philip is stoned as if being stoned to death wasn't enough. He's stoned, and they keep him alive in order to then throw him on a cross and torture him some more. But he died with his trust and hope and faith in Jesus. Next we have Simon, crucified in Egypt under Trajan's reign. I'm just going to move a little quicker now. Thomas, remember that guy I said? I won't believe until I touch his hands and his feet. You think that guy wouldn't squeal if it was all a sham? Thomas died by death by spear thrust in Kalamati, India, where he went to spread the word of this truth after he saw Christ's life, death, and burial and resurrection. Next we have Thaddeus. Thaddeus was killed by arrows. James, son of Zebedee, was killed by sword in 44 AD by order of King Herod Agrippa I of Judea, killed by sword. This isn't James, a brother of Jesus. This is son of Zebedee, James. Lastly, we have Bartholomew. Bartholomew was beaten, filleted alive, and crucified upside down, then beheaded. Filleted, that means you're peeling off skin. Filleted, crucified, upside down, then beheaded. We learn later that Paul, I didn't even talk about Paul, he's like an apostle born out of season, having a vision of Christ after Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. Paul was ultimately beheaded under Nero's reign. So here are all these people. What did they die for? A lie or the truth? Next we move on quickly to history's claims. Now we're going to look at outside of the Bible. What I want you to realize first is that the Bible is history. The Bible is a valid historical document. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It's not just the Bible is a historical document. It is every book in the Bible is a historical document, speaking of time, places, and things that coincide with guys like Josephus, Jewish historian, and Tacitus, and all these different Roman historians that talk about these things that all lace in together as to the truth of who Jesus was. So the New Testament, Matthew, is a historical document. It is a scroll that was passed down, that it was written, that was transcribed. Mark, Luke, John, all of these can stand alone and stand together. These are the Gospels, and they all speak of who Jesus was. Next thing you're going to see is what's something they call the Gnostic Gospels. It comes from the Greek word gnosis, which is knowledge. And so the Gnostic Gospels they believe in a different, the Gnostics, the people who follow those Gnostic Gospels, believed in this enlightenment, this mystic enlightenment, and that you could achieve that by some type of, understanding and divine knowing. It's made up of Gospels like the book of Judas, the book of Peter, not 1st and 2nd Peter that are in the Bible, but a separate book that dates much later, Peter, book of Mary, the book of Philip, the book of Thomas, and then there are also separate Gnostic Gospels like the infancy Gospel of Thomas. The infancy Gospels where they try to speculate as to what Jesus was doing when he was a little boy and things like that. What you can know about these is that they're all later creations, except for the book of Thomas. The book of Thomas is, some would argue, date back to the 2nd century, which is around when some of the Gospels date back to. But the majority of them being much later dated. And then when you read them, this is what I've always been taught, is that if you want to see if these are real and should be added to what we call the canon, the Holy Bible, all you got to do is read them. Read the book of the Gnostic Gospel of Peter, and it's going to talk about Jesus walking out of the tomb and a large cross like floating behind him. You start to look like, wait a minute. This doesn't look like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This doesn't look like Jesus breaking bread and eating fish and teaching and doing the things that he did. Now we got floating crosses. So this massive floating cross. And then ultimately Jesus is this massive giant-like figure towering 30 feet in the air. And ultimately it ascends upward, I believe, in that. It's been a while since I read it. But those are the Gnostic Gospels. It's like this mystic idea. And all you need to do to see if they're valid is read them. And you'll see very quickly that Jesus in the infancy Gospel of Thomas kills people. Like, anybody seen Brightburn, like the evil Superman? If Superman were to be evil as a little boy, what life would look like? And that's it's the Brightburn of Jesus, the infancy Gospel in Thomas, where Jesus is like mad at kids and killing them. And then he raises them back up because he feels bad. Yeah. Pretty crazy. It's just, all you need to do is read it. And you can make your own assumptions as to are they real or not. But what I do want to show you is, it's later creations for the most part, except for Thomas, but they're looking back and they're transcribing what everybody's talking about. Why are they writing entire books about Mary? Because Mary was a person. Why are they writing entire books about Jesus in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th century? Because he was a real man. And they're making their own assumptions as to who he was. So those are the Gnostic Gospels, point back at Jesus in somewhat of a positive light, unless you're in the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Then he's a murderer. Josephus, my favorite, and the one in which we derive most of our Jewish history from in history. And Josephus says this. Josephus says, there was a man at this time, if it be lawful to call him a man. His name was Jesus. And he drew a great many of Jews and Gentiles to follow him. That's what the book of Josephus says. I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm not talking about a believer in Jesus. I'm talking about a man who lived in the 1st century who's writing about Jesus because Jesus walked this earth. And he's saying that he grew a great many teachers to him, and ultimately he says that he was crucified. Sounds familiar? Sounds like the Gospels that we read. That's what Josephus says about him. Julian the Apostate was an emperor Julian the Apostate says this: he healed blind and lame people in Bethesda and Bethany. Sound familiar? What happened in Bethany? Lazarus was raised from the dead. What happened in Bethesda? We see that a crippled man was raised up. And now other people are talking about it. Not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul. Not just Jude. So we move on. The Talmud is a collection of Jewish writings. Now these are the Jewish people that have a collection of writings called the Talmud. They say this: he was accused of practicing sorcery and leading Israel astray. The Christ was crucified on the eve of Passover. It's exactly when he was crucified. He was crucified on the eve of Passover. They claim that he was practicing and accused of sorcery. Well, what did he do? He healed people. How did they claim he did it? You remember when they said he does these things by the power of Beelzebub? Exactly. Sound familiar? Coincidence? I think not. They all point back at the same things. Tacitus is a Roman historian. He says this: under Herod, during the reign of Tiberius, Pontius Pilate condemned Christ to die. Who condemned Christ to die? Pontius Pilate. Who condemned him to die in the Gospels? Pontius Pilate. Under whose reign? Tiberius. It's Augustus, and it's Tiberius. That's Roman history. Next, we have Thallus. Thallus is a Greek historian, and he says it this way: his crucifixion was accompanied by 3 hours of unexplained darkness. Come on, somebody. His crucifixion was followed by 3 hours of unexplained darkness. What do the men at the cross say after this happens and the darkness falls and the veil in the temple rents? They are awestruck. Was this not the Son of the God? Was this not the Son of the living God? Well, Greek historians are telling us the same thing, that the crucifixion was followed by 3 hours of unexplained darkness. Pliny was a governor in Asia Minor. Pliny says it this way: his disciples took to the habit of meeting on a fixed day of the week and took their names, Christians, from him, Christ. They gave worship to Christ as to a God. They bound themselves over to abstaining from wicked deeds, fraud, theft, and adultery, and lying. It's talking about the Christians now that follow Jesus and what they looked like. Next, we have Lucian, which is a Greek writer. And Lucian says this: Christians held a contempt for death and were known for a voluntary self-devotion. Christians believed themselves all brothers from the moment of their conversions. Christians lived after Christ's laws. What do we call everybody here today? Hey, brother. Christians held contempt for death. They didn't care. Kill me. I believe, I know Jesus was the Messiah. We move on. So we have the claims. The claims here. These are Christians who were all willing to die for a lie, for a concocted scheme, or for the truth. Listen, the book of Martyrs says the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So much so that today in Cache, Oklahoma, at the foothills of the Wichita Mountains, a group of men are all in a room together, and we're reading about this man in history. We're reading his claims in the Gospels. We're reading the historical documents and looking back at this man. We're looking at all of world religion, and all the spokes are pointing back to one man. Now my question to you today is, who do you say that he is? Who do you say that he is? That's what he looks to Peter and he asks. So we know today, as we've looked at all of these claims, that listen, you've got a decision to make. Is he a madman or is he God? Where do you stand? Is he a madman or is he God? Because if he is who he said he was, then everything he said is true. That if you're in him, you are a new creation. The old is gone, behold, the new has come. That he honors marriage So much so that the only out he gives for divorce is for sexual immorality. That means he honors your marriage. The covenant between you and your wife, that there's a restoration that he desires for you. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen. I can't promise that. It means that broken and lost people can come to the cross and find healing. It means that drug addicts can be set free. It means that we don't need to worry about tomorrow and fear about the clothing on our backs and the food on our table, because he said he would provide and he would care for us and provide our daily bread. Listen, man, do you believe him? I pray that you can come to that place where you can make that decision, that you understand who he is. And if he looked at you today, like he did Peter, he says, who do people say that I am? And we would say, man, some say that you're the Son of God. Some say that you're one of many gods. Some say that you're an enlightened vegetarian. Those guys are crazy. Some say that you're the Christ idea. And then he looks at you and says, no, who do you say that I am? Trevor, who do you say that I am? Hayden, who do you say that I am? It's a question he'll ask all of us, man. Look right into our eyes and say, who do you say that I am? Not who does the world say, not what does your mama say, who do you say? It brings it all back. That's a funnel to us. The responsibility is in our laps to make that answer. Let's bow our heads. God, we thank you today, and we meticulously walked through, Lord, what the things you said. Well, and as we read those things, we only come to two conclusions. God, and I come to the conclusion that you are who you said you are, that history's claims say the same, that world religion says the same, that you're somebody, but I don't believe that you're just somebody. I believe you're God of heaven and earth, Elohim, that you are Yahweh, that you are the God of creation who put on skin to die for me. God, and if that is true, then everything changes. Now, the things that I thought were important on life, they don't matter anymore. They all fade away. But Jesus, I look back and I answer you today. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are God with us, Emmanuel. God, and I trust you and I cling to you. Lord, take my doubt and my fear and my worry, and I give it to you. Some of you men, you're at a place where you're right there on the line, and God is asking that of you as your heart moves this morning. Who do you say that I am? And there's still an element of doubt. I promise you this, that there will always be a little bit of doubt. It's just the way life works. You're not resurrected yet. You're not glorified yet. You're still walking around in a broken shell, in this skin. Humanity, the doubt and fear and worries bombard. But at some point, you need to make a decision as to who he is. And at some point, there is a leap of faith. Because, Lord, we haven't touched you. Because, Lord, we haven't heard your voice teach over a warm, crackling fire in the evening as your disciples did. Because, Lord, we haven't had the fish pass from your hands to ours and the bread broke from your hands to ours. That, Lord, at the end of the day, there is this element of faith that your word speaks of. That, Lord, even after all the facts are laid on the table as they have been, that we make a leap to you into your arms. Lord, and something inside of us is welling up, and something inside of us changes, and something inside of us challenges us to cling to you as our heart moves. And if you're here today and your heart is moving, I want you to respond to that today. Just as those disciples did as they gave their lives. If you're here today and you're